Welcome back to From the Belly. This is Duck Wheeler, and I've got Chris Kratzer today as my guest. I'm going to do a little bit of setting the table as I always do. But Chris, thanks a lot for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Right on, man. You're a busy man, so when I reached out to you, I said, hey, I'm a stranger. I said to you, we were getting ready this morning, that it seems like you're in the business of folks reaching out to you and asking for things and making comments about the things that you write. I want to learn a little bit about your seems to be kind of a new internet presence that you have, but maybe not. Because my wife asked me this morning, she said, you usually talk to your guests beforehand. Did you talk and get to know Chris at all? I said, nope. I said, we're just jumping into it. And she's like, you feel good about that? And I said, yeah, I hope he does. But yeah, I feel great about it. So again, thank you. And you're
Sure.
in somewhere in North Carolina, but you're not in the mountains.
Correct.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
man. Are you from that part of the country originally?
No, not originally.
Where are you from originally, Chris?
Well, originally Brookfield, Wisconsin, and then we moved to Florida when I was about 10.
What part of Florida?
Well, Clearwater mainly.
Okay. I used to live in Florida. I know that. Of course, when you grow up in Kentucky and if you have money and your family travels, Florida becomes the only Hawaii you've ever known.
Yeah, it does become a vacation spot.
So that's where we always went. And of course, I live on the West Coast now, and Hawaii is the destination for many people. Chris, tell us a little bit about your experience as a pastor. Maybe we'll pick up there. And kind of, it seems to me your bio reads that you've transitioned out of that everyday work. And tell us just a little bit about that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some things that you've posted. I got on your website and I had a heck of a time selecting something because I wanted to talk about just about everything that you wrote. And I got a few other things as I've been preparing for this. But your story, how you ended up in the pastor role, and then how you transitioned out of that.
So I grew up mainly Lutheran in an ELCA congregation. Parents attended there. The majority of the time, it was an ELCA experience for me. So when I felt a calling to be a pastor, the Lutheran tradition was I was directed. It's a 4-year seminary degree after 4 years of college. And so in college, I did a piano performance degree, knowing that I would be going to seminary, and went to seminary, ELCA seminary, graduated, got married, and then started off in that tradition. You have to start off as an associate pastor, typically. So, and you're assigned a synod. I was assigned the Florida Bahamas Synod, and I was an associate there for a couple years. And then the expectation is after 2 years in their world, if you're worth anything as a pastor, you're going to go, have your own congregation somewhere. So there was a church that opened up, and they wanted me to transition them from a traditional to a contemporary kind of ministry. And it was around that time that I'd gotten connected with Community Church of Joy, which was just a huge mega Lutheran church out in Arizona. Walt Kalstad was the senior pastor. And this was right at the time when Rick Warren put out the purpose-driven church stuff, all this Bill Hybels and Rick Warren and Ed Young. This was all just beginning to emerge. And, I'm 25 years old at the time. I looked at that. I was like, man, my ego took a big dose. And I said, I want to be the next Bill Hybels. I want to be the next, of those guys. And everything that I was reading and seeing in that landscape, made me realize that there's nothing like that really in the Lutheran circles. There's no big mega churches erupting except for maybe that one in Arizona. And then I started to think, well, why is that? And well, maybe it's because of the theology that's more biblically based, and have a relationship with Jesus and invite him into your heart and all that evangelical stuff. And I was like, oh wow, maybe that's the code that I need to crack here in order to get into this world. And so, kind of honestly, it was my ego that made an emotional choice that I wanted to get in this world. And then the next step for me was to spiritually rationalize the transition. So I, started to refute infant baptism. And at that time, I I felt like it was wrong for people of the LGBTQ community to become pastors and ordain women and all that kind of stuff. So I really started to make a transition out of the more progressive ELCA Lutheran experience into a Southern Baptist evangelical thing. In fact, the church I was at the time, as a Lutheran, we were very successful, but I got connected with a non-denominational, very contemporary kind of mega church at the time in Tampa, and became close, to the senior pastor. He mentored me along. Long story short, I left the ELCA, cashed in the beginning of my pension, and then, moved over into evangelical world.
What year was that?
Man, that would have been probably 2000. And so then I just really believed that if I dot all the I's, crossed all the T's, did all the pray hard and the formulas and everything that the evangelical world teaches you about how to be successful and how to press into the Lord and all those, that jargon I once spoke, as time went on, none of it worked for me. I didn't turn out to have, amazing overnight story of success with church life. I didn't wake up one day and 400 people are attending the church that weren't there the previous Sunday. So there wasn't any of that. And I wasn't really, this is over time, but I really realized that I wasn't becoming a better person by adopting the evangelical tenets. I actually became a worse person. I wasn't more like Jesus. I was kind of less like Jesus. My marriage wasn't any better. If anything, it was more stressful. So long story short, the more I really believed the evangelical teachings, the more I believed them all the way, the worse things, if I was honest with myself, the worst things were for me. And so it all really kind of came to a climax. We had moved up into the Salisbury area of North Carolina, where I had started to pastor a church there. And
Not a Lutheran church.
No. This was another non-denominational conservative church. I never looked back. I never went back to Lutheranism after being, a Southern Baptist evangelical guy. And anyway, there were some health things going on for me, just everything in ministry didn't, turn out the way I thought it should. Just a lot of dominoes falling in a negative direction for me. And so basically, and this is something that I tell in that first book that I wrote, it's in depth there. But basically, we were living in we had bought a townhouse, and I just was upstairs in the bedroom, and I told my wife, I called her upstairs. I said, listen, you need to take the kids and you need to find a better husband and a better future for them, a better dad. I'm just done. I don't know what's wrong. Everything's falling apart for me. And it really came to a suicidal point there. But obviously that didn't happen. And I really, at that point, I felt like I really experienced for the first time, like the grace of God and like a real encounter with that. And that was a turning point for me. So I began to really reevaluate my faith, reevaluate God, reevaluate everything that I thought was true. And over the course of time and years, I finally transitioned out of that world and into, I hate the word progressive, but that's the best word right now we can use for people to get a sense of it, but a real progressive mindset. And it didn't happen overnight. It started one step at a time. Back then, there weren't books on deconstruction. Deconstruction wasn't even a word. So those of us who were doing this, it was very it was uncharted territory. In fact, in later years, I would have a lot of ELCA pastors and other pastors call me up and say, hey, how did you do that? And because they wanted to make these kind of same transitions. So that's a very shortened version of everything, but it didn't happen overnight. It was, and I think for me, the catalyst of it all was that I was honest with myself. I was honest with my doubts. I was honest with, the ramifications of evangelicalism in my life. I saw the results. I saw the darkened fruit on the tree. And I was honest about it for the first time. All the self-deception and dishonesty with yourself and other people that you have to embrace in order to become an evangelical, particularly in leadership. Those things I just unwound and got to the place of honesty. This is not the way I would draw it up now, but I had gone to another church in the community that we live right now. And it was a Southern Baptist church. Asked me to transition it, into a contemporary thing, just like I'd done in other circumstances. But one day I just kind of walked. I just kind of walked away from it all, honestly, and just pulled the plug, pulled the Band-Aid right off. And that moment on, I just never looked back. And so what happened for me, though, was that, and how I'm kind of here talking to you, is that I had become a progressive pastor to the point of becoming affirming, is what the language would be, affirming of the LGBTQ community. And, you got to remember, this is years and years ago, right? This is back when that was unheard of, or that kind of transition was something that was not like it is today. It's not commonplace at all back then. So my pastor, who had mentored me for a good portion of my career, he called me up and he said, "Hey, Chris, I just want to tell you something." And I know that when, Michael, my pastor of many years, speaks, I always, probably need to listen. And he said, "Chris, I just want to let you know that I think you're a really good preacher. I see some of your stuff, preaching wise, but Chris, you're an amazing writer." And at that point, Doug, in my life, I hadn't been writing at all. I mean, the blog that I have now that I haven't written on in probably 2 years, but at that point, I was writing something once every 6 months just for play. I never thought of myself as a writer, never tried to write. He said, "No, Chris, you're an amazing writer. This is your thing. This is what you need to do." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I mean, it really, I was like, took me out, so surprised. I'm thinking, what in the world? And anyway, so I just decided, okay, well, let's see what happens. So I wrote an article called "What If You're Wrong? A Question for Every Anti-Gay Pastor, Father, Brother, Friend." That piece, I posted just a link of it on Facebook. And at that time, I maybe had 400 people who were friends at that time. Overnight, somehow, the thing went viral. And the next morning, I'm looking at hundreds of emails. It was that where I realized, oh, wow, maybe there is something to this writing thing. And I just continue to write and write and write. And that's kind of what led me to where I'm at now with, what I do through social media and online and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it sounds like the writing was clearly the skill and gift, and then you had a message that resonated as well, right? I mean, all of a
Well, yeah, I
sudden, like,
mean, and that's the thing about it. The purpose of my writing has always been to become a voice for those who have been spiritually oppressed and feel that either they don't have a voice or they don't have the courage or the words and stuff and don't know how to describe what they're feeling. But for me to come alongside and kind of be that voice where, for whatever reason, it's not there. And then the second purpose of my writing is to call out of the shadows the evils of toxic Christianity, evangelical world, all that stuff. So that's been really the heart behind my writing. I think if I surveyed everybody who's ever read my stuff, I think probably 85-90% of people who like my writing like it because it communicates in a way that it speaks what they're thinking and feeling. They just didn't have the words to put it there.
yeah, the old expression, "Scratches where you itch," but I think also, more importantly, it's medicinal for the wounds.
Yeah, and it gives courage and hope and
That's right.
a feeling that you're not alone. Someone else is feeling the same thing that you're feeling. It validates the emotion, all that kind of stuff.
All that kind of stuff. Thank you for your story. I know it was compressed and condensed, but thank you. And thanks for taking us into that moment when you went upstairs in your townhome and fell
Yeah,
apart.
yeah,
I'm sure you know Richard, I might be wrong, but Richard Rohr's book, Falling Upward. It sounds like you had a falling upward moment.
yeah. I know Richard Rohr. I purposely actually don't read a lot of other spiritual writers just because I never want to. I had an incident, early on in my ministry where I've got a little thing where I can, memorize stuff that I hear. When I was preaching, I was, preaching sometimes 3 services a day, and people would notice that I would memorize my messages to the point of they were the same words every single time. So that kind of gets me into trouble sometimes because I'll hear somebody talk, or I'll hear somebody, another writer or a speaker or something, and then I'll internalize it, not realizing that that's theirs and it's not mine. And then,
Interesting.
and but anyway, that's why I've stopped, reading
Yeah.
a lot of other people, because I want everything that I put on paper to be completely authentic to me.
Wow, that could be a second podcast conversation. So when you were in seminary, take us back to that time for a minute. When you began to, in your words, when you began to get honest with yourself later and began to face the doubts, and as you unpack those, it clearly was a trajectory out of that whole world. That 4 years in seminary, did you have inklings of doubts then that would surface at some level, and you would have a way to push those away, or did you have those moments of hard study in seminary for 4 years, or was it just that you were fully engrossed in that, and somehow these doubts that lived inside of you, maybe from even childhood, they weren't available to you?
Well, I think it was twofold. One, a lot of the deconstructing and reevaluating happened post seminary,
Right.
when I was out into the pastoral world and all the things I described with Rick Warren and all that kind of stuff. That was post seminary. However, in seminary, there were times when I had severe anxiety towards the end of my seminary, didn't really understand where it was coming from. But I think it was a good part of it was entering into a world, and even into a calling and career that I just wasn't ready for, spiritually, emotionally, and also, not really sure if this really aligns to who I am
Hmm.
and what I really need to be doing. So I think it was, anxiety in the sense of trying to be, kind of a round peg into a square hole. But God, you just right out of college and into a 4-year seminary and all that. You just don't have the capacity, at least I did not, to kind of see the forest from the trees there. I would say yes, there was definitely anxieties, not for the same reasons, but then when I got out into the pastoral world, then the whole evangelical crisis for me is where that took place.
But use the word progressive, and then you said you had a problem with that or whatever, that makes me curious about that.
The word progressive, it's kind of like back in the day when anybody said contemporary, right? Contemporary worship could mean anything. It could mean someone sitting up there with a flute. Another, on stage could mean, guitars, drums, and smoke and stage lighting. So contemporary me could mean all kinds of different things.
Hmm.
And so I think what happened with the word contemporary is people had to start really if you're going to say contemporary, you're going to have to really speak to what you really mean by that, because that could mean a whole lots of different. It's a big umbrella. I think the same thing is with progressive, because progressive can mean so many different things. Some people, they would say, well, we accept gay people into our church, queer people into our church, but we want them to eventually repent of it. And they would say, well, we're progressive in that way. And I'm like,
Good point.
so there's a lot of describing that needs to happen when you lay that term out there. And that's the difficulty I think I have with it.
Thanks a lot for unpacking a bit. Beautiful word, progressive, but how it can be problematic because many times it's not contextualized. So thank you for that. I think what I'd like to do is to transition to two things. Number one is tell you how I got interested in you. I learned about you on Facebook, as I mentioned earlier. And then I went to your website, and then I want to read excerpts from, as I said, it was a post back in May of 2022. And to get some of your comments on, I guess we could say, some older pieces of writing for you. Sometimes I'll drop down and read people's comments about things. And I thought about this morning. I typically don't stay in that very long. They all seem to be either, agreeing with the author or poster, which is great. And then you'll get somebody who's coming in really hot and saying something combative that many times if the person like yourself who posted it doesn't respond, I've come to really appreciate that, because I'm sure you're like, this is going to go nowhere. This is going to be antithetical to what I'm even trying to do here. to get into, some kind of a fight or power struggle. But then there's a few times you have made comments, and I've appreciated that. Get a sense that you read all of them.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, I figured you did. And I'll tell you why I came to that, because, there's no way for me to see or anybody else to see. Does he read all of these, or does he just respond to the ones that he really likes or dislikes? But this one stood out to me. The person wrote this. We were talking about, controversial stuff within Christendom, Christianity, and this person responded, Chris, I am sincerely looking for the truth. I agree with you most of the time. I'm just struggling with where to put it all. I'm struggling with how to follow Christ and at the same time separate it from the apparent mess of evangelicalism. And I knew nothing about the person who posted that, but it really drew me in. I could hear the struggle there. Somebody that's not sure where to step next. Reads you. I think you probably would appreciate that she doesn't agree with everything, because I get a sense that that's not what you're after. But really to say there's something that Chris is saying to this person, and that person's saying, this is meaningful to me. And Chris, you responded with this. I get it. You're not alone. If it seems helpful to you, let's set up a time to chat by phone. And then you began to post your cell number. And that really stood out to me. It's like, man, not that I didn't think you were sincere before, but I thought, this guy's making himself available. And I texted you just to see if we could set up this podcast. But I assume this person reached out to you and you had a conversation with them. And I thought, man, that's what really kind of clicked for me, because I could hear this person's cry for assistance and help and guidance. You responded. So in May of 2022, wrote, imagine a faith so weak, a truth so fragile, a God so vulnerable, that you have to ban books to keep kids from seeing behind the curtain and to prevent the entirety of your faith from crashing down. Imagine a faith so violent, a vision so discriminating, and a history so racist that you have to rewrite it, erase it, and frantically keep it from being taught, learned, and acknowledged because you're so nervous about people seeing it. Deep down, you might just like to repeat it. Imagine a faith so brutal, a truth so deniable, an identity so brittle that you have to demonize and criminalize transgender kids and their families in order to satisfy your addiction to power, refuel your hatred, and keep your deep-seated heterosexual insecurities from being exposed, all while you secretly pray for their suicides. I think I'll stop there. That's some hard-hitting writing.
Yeah.
Comments?
Well, that's exactly how I feel. That's exactly what I believe. That's exactly what I see. It's kind of for me, it's hard to look at something and then just pretend I'm not seeing what I'm not seeing and then to not react to it. And I think that, all those statements were not only true in 2022, they're even more true now. I remember when I wrote Leather-Bound Terrorism, that was my first book. And I had several people come, oh, that's too strong of a word, terrorism and this, and come on, Chris. And yet here we are today, right? So, that's the only really comment I have on that writing is sounds pretty good to me.
Right, good. What's it been like for you to get somebody to really respond back with your words are too strong? And what's it like for you personally? You draw the curtains and go to bed at night, and you said, some really strong things. Using the word evil, using the word cruel. That last portion, all while you secretly pray for their suicides. What's it like for you as a human being to write that and then live with the writing and live with the response?
To me, it's saying what so desperately needs to be said. It's just really articulating the way things are. And I obviously have people who, come back at me and say, you just sound like you're angry and bitter. And I'm like, hell yeah, I am. And I never want to lose that anger. I never want to lose the bitterness. I don't find that to be healing. It may be a selfish thing for me, but it's not going to do anybody else any good if I'm no longer looking at their situation and being angered just because mine is okay now. So I feel like I keep that anger and that bitterness. I don't try to rid that of myself. I don't see that as a demon within me. I see that as an angel. The fact that I'm angry and I write with precision to me means that my soul is still alive and I'm actually seeing what is really going on. And I think what happens is for those who are oppressed and are, they hear those words and they're like, damn straight, that's exactly it. And those words are cathartic and accurate, and like finally somebody's seeing it, finally somebody's getting it. To other people who may be more comfortable or maybe just don't have a perspective on these things yet, sure, they're gonna be like, well, you just sound, this, that, and the other. And okay, well, I am, and I'm not gonna ever apologize for it. I don't go to sleep at night going, gosh, what's gonna happen now? I said these things, were they too strong? I really don't lay with that. Lose sleep about is, man, did I say this well enough? Did I say
Well
this
enough.
clear enough that I did I say the same things over again? Those kind of things, but not like, was it too strong?
Got you.
Maybe I should, but I just have never been.
I
mean, look where we are, and
yeah, look where we are.
there was a comment recently where a person was like, you just seem angry. And I said, damn straight I am. I mean, and my question I want to ask back, and sometimes I have, is why aren't you? Where's your rage? Where's your bitterness? Where's your angst? Because man, if we just sit here and just, and just go numb to these things, then we are really, we're not in the battle. That's for sure.
She used an expression to write with precision. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I don't want there to be any fluff, or I want it to be clear, and so that there's nothing that could be wishy-washy about it. And where there's a gray area, then we make that really gray, right? We make sure that we're communicating grayness. But where it's black or where it's white, or where the truth is really the truth, then we're going to say the truth. Where there are people secretly praying for the suicides of transgender people, I'm going to say it because I know it's there. And I know it because I was that guy. I lived in that world. I don't speak out of like theory or reading something in a book. I was that evangelical Southern Baptist pastor who would get up in front of the church and denounce all this and pray against these things and wish for this and do that. And I know I'm not the only one because I lived in that world. It was all like that for the most part. So why not pull back the curtain and show what it really is? Because I think that's, that's what I mean when I talk about the purpose of my writing is to chase this stuff out of the shadows.
Yes. Thank you, Chris. But this question of why be a Christian, this is a recent post that you put up. I should have an excerpt from that piece, but you know it well, and people can find it on your Facebook page. In essence, if I took the cliff notes of what you wrote, could I put it this way? Feel free to correct any of it because it's your content. If I or my neighbor can be a really good human being and love people in my neighborhood and love people in my community and take good care of my family and express the rights for all human beings, and to really work towards a world that's so progressive that it can imagine to accept everything as beautiful and good, except for the things that attack beautiful and good. Why in the world would I need to go to church? Why would I need to call myself a Christian? Why would I need to adopt any of that language? Why would I need that identity when my identity is in my lived life? Is that a pretty good condensed form?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the question. When you start, and I think I alluded to this in that post, when you start to say, okay, well, the reason why I'm a Christian then is because, well, what about hell? What am I going to do with that? Or, boy, if I'm no longer a Christian, then is God going to withhold blessings from me? Or, that kind of stuff. Those things, when you say, okay, well, when you start to go, well, why? If you answer the question, well, why am I a Christian? I think most of the time, if not all the time, you're gonna identify the very toxic thing that you're holding on to. Well, I'm a Christian because I don't want to go to hell. So underneath that is this psychotic belief that God created this world in a way that his best idea is to deal with the humanity that he created, no doubt. The situation he designed, right, is to go ahead and have my son murdered, and somehow that, allow me as God, I have to have this happen for me to do the right thing and give salvation. And then there's just so many flaws to that. And, the point is that, okay, if that's your reason for becoming a Christian, that's like fear driven. That's self driven. All the things that people become a Christian for are really, in my mind, unnecessary. Perhaps not only perhaps unnecessary, but harmful.
I'm gonna be that antagonist person, which I'm not. By the way, when I shared some of your writing with my son Caleb's a filmmaker in LA, and I end up talking about, even though we do talk about the arts. He read some of your stuff. He said, "Man, Dad, I think you ought to do a round table to where you get some other guests involved." And that's initially when I wrote to you, and then I told you a few people fell out. They were busy, and for whatever reason. It wasn't because they knew who they'd be talking to, because nobody knew. Yeah, nobody knew who. But what Caleb said to me was, get somebody from the other side who's going to challenge Chris, because I want to hear not so much a debate, but don't just get somebody who's going to go, yeah, Chris, I just lap up everything that you say. So if I could play that person for a moment,
Sure.
Sometimes I don't know who I am, but I role play really, really well other individuals. So antagonist says, "Oh, Chris, yeah, that's a toxic, terrible message. If I was still stuck in that place of my depravity, and I'm going to be out of the role play for a moment, and we've got the glossary of terms. I'm going to use some of those. I come from the South. I didn't grow up in a Southern Baptist church, but I know the language of that because I was in that world for a while, not as deep as you were. Hey, Chris, I'm covered in the blood. I mean, my sins have been washed away. And so this terrible world you speak of, yeah, that's the world that I'm free from now, because I mean, God sees me through Christ, and I'm covered. I mean, I'm good. So I think you and I are in more alignment with, or maybe you've regressed back to living in fear, but I'm good because I'm waiting for the return of Christ. I'm washed in the blood. That's old language, but I've been atoned for. So you're really challenging the classic Orthodox definition of the atonement theology. That's what I think you're really saying. The death of Christ on the cross essentially means nothing to you, and it means the world to me. It saved me.
Yeah, and so you would want my response to that? Is that what you're asking?
Sure. I mean, we can have a bit of a conversation as if I'm that contender, right?
Yeah. To that kind of comment, I would say, well, you know what? I mean, that may be your experience, and I completely understand that. I used to see things that way. But then help me understand how it is that you can read the same Bible that countless other people have read. There's over 3,000 different Christian denominations, and not one of them always agrees on what salvation means and how we're saved. You have some people who believe that you have to have a personal relationship with Jesus. You have the Arminians who would say that you have to invite Jesus into your heart, or else you don't have a saving experience. And yet you have the Calvinists who say that there's nothing you can do, that you're either part of the elect and God predestined your salvation and you're going to be saved whether you like it or not. And you may be saved, but your children aren't, and there's nothing that they can do about it. And so we have those two different things. So excuse me, sir. So tell me, in the midst of all that, in a Christian faith that doesn't even agree on something so central as salvation, how do you know if you're saved? Because not everybody would say that you are, even within the Christian world. And there's passages where that are interpreted in Scripture for Paul, where you could even say that you can lose your salvation. Mm. So if that's the case, then let me ask you, well, how much belief is enough? So where's the line, right? So if I have to have a saving faith, and I say I'm washed in the blood,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what did it says that godly repentance godly sorrow leads to repentance, right? So when were you sad enough, right? You can't have godly repentance without sorrow, right? And if you don't have the right repentance, then you're not going to be saved. And then this blood that you're talking about, does it really cover you? Are you sure about that? Because how much is enough, right? What I mean, is it tears in the eyes? Is it getting on your hands and knees? Is it wailing? How do you, hey, and let me ask you something. It talks about like having a contrite heart in your heart. You got to really believe it with all your heart. You heard the pastor say that. How do you know if your heart really was believing enough? So how do you know? I mean, is it, tell me where the standard is. Where do we know enough has been enough in your faith? Please tell me where that is.
Well, I just I want to tell you a little bit about my story, but I've locked in. I just don't let those doubts creep in. I was taught very early on after a conversion experience that was very real for me. But then some Christians got a hold of me, and I started studying the Bible, which then I didn't have any. Well, it's kind of interesting as I talk about it, Chris. I'm now beginning to kind of question my own story, because I didn't really want to read the Bible. I didn't grow up in a Christian family or whatever, but I had an authentic Jesus experience that changed me. And then I started studying, and people got a hold of me and told me what I needed to believe. And I think then I got educated in once saved, always saved. So I haven't studied theology like you have. All I know is I locked into, I'm hanging on for dear life. And I did have a conversion experience. And then every doubt that ever comes in, I literally suppress it. I just go and I read the Bible harder. And I just memorize. I was taught to memorize scripture early on. And anyways, let's pop out of the role play.
Yeah. But you can
but
see where
yeah, you sure can see where it goes. But you can also hear in this individual, and it's interesting. That's my story.
Right.
My story at the age of 19, being suicidal.
Right.
The way you talked about going upstairs in your townhome, I went upstairs and with my mother, who had profound Jesus experience, and she didn't grow up in Christianity. She had a drinking problem. She fell down a flight of stairs. She almost died in a tiny little hospital in a small town in Kentucky. And she had a God experience totally outside of religion or church or anything. And here I am 5 years later, 6 years later, suicidal in my own right. And my mother leads me to Christ. I said, call the local psychologist. I remember in this tiny little town, it stood out to me, and it's interesting. It stood out because it was different than anything else. But also it stood out because there must have been something inside of me yearning for help, because I was struggling my junior and senior year in high school, really, really struggling. And there was a psychologist in town. He had a little sign out in front of his old white house, and it just said, John, if I remember, John Hannafin, psychologist. So that night with my mother, and I'm breaking down saying I'm suicidal, I got dark thoughts, I don't trust myself, I mean, I'm crying out for help. I said, call that guy, John, whatever his name is. And my mother said, well, it's 10 o'clock at night. We can't call him, but I can tell you what changed my life. She had tried to give me a Bible before and try to convert my father and all that stuff. I had an authentic Jesus experience. And then some Christians got a hold of me, and I got into Bible study, and I started reading it. And that's when I took on these layers of what I was supposed to believe. And I think that's, who knows, the person that I quoted earlier that wrote to you just saying, I need some help with this. That could very well be that person's story, and I know you're reaching that crowd. I've been able to bust out of that. It took another catastrophe. It took my brother's suicide.
Yeah, which is why I think it's important that more and more we separate Jesus out from Christianity.
I think that must be one of your core messages.
It is.
Or if maybe that's the foundation of it. Are you familiar with John Shelby Spong?
Mm-hmm.
He's been really important in my development. My wife and I went to hear him years ago. My wife, if she were on this podcast, she would say, I got a hold of a John Shelby Spong book back in the early 2000s. She told me this 2 mornings ago and reminded me. She said, Doug, I read the book. Do you remember this? And I said, yeah, I kind of do. She said, I kind of read it privately because something was speaking to me about it. And she said, I was 3/4 of the way through it or all the way through it. I literally threw it across the room. It scared the hell out of me. It scared me because I was starting to gravitate towards what Spong was talking about. I couldn't handle it then. Well, she's clearly come to handle it now because she's very far outside of this whole Christian community, but still is a follower of Jesus. Maybe if we changed why be a Christian to why follow Jesus, Chris would be able to respond to that. So how about if we put that on the table for a moment? Why follow Christ? Why follow Jesus?
Well, you don't have to. I mean, everything that is holy and pure and divine and powerful of Jesus is available outside of Jesus, because it's the highest thing is love, right? So the connector of it all is love. And love is available outside of any wall, any construct, any belief. It's universal. It exists everywhere. And yes, you can see examples of that in Jesus. You can see, personifications of that with Jesus, right? But you can also see that in yourself. You can see it in other people. You can see it in nature. Paul himself said, listen, y'all don't have any excuse for not believing, because everything that can be known is actually, you can see it all in nature. In fact, I really think you can get a hold of the very core, the completeness of who Jesus is and what can be learned and modeled and inspired by, but you can see those things outside of Jesus as well. So that, to me, because love is the great connector. Love is the center of it. So why follow Jesus? Well, follow Jesus. It's a great example. It's a great teacher. All those things, but ultimately, John figured it out that God put his light, or God's light, within everyone. So, call it light, call it the universe, call it Jesus, call it whatever you want, call it love. But we're centered on the divine and in its purity. And I think that's why you even have writers within the Christian Bible who say that God is love. This is, if we have to reduce it down to what it truly is, then that's the source. That's the essence of it. Which is why I think, sure, I tell my kids all the time, I'm all about Jesus. Awesome. Let's just do that. Right.
Let's do that. Yeah.
But then everything else, this Christian stuff, all this other stuff, it's in most times, it's actually taking away instead of helping, from that, So that's, the question, well, why do I need to be a Christian? I don't need to be a Christian. I don't believe that my salvation rests in the atonement theory, in the, I don't believe that we were ever separated from God. I believe that's the religious lie. I don't believe that I need to pray in order for God to be close to me, or I have to do this or that, or I don't feel like any of that really is, in my experience, valid. That's the question. Why do we really feel the need to that? And let me tell you something. There are sacred cows that I run into, sometimes not realizing that it's a sacred cow, but across the board, progressives, evangelicals, anybody in the Christian world, right? When you raise that question, when you start punching at well, wait a minute, now you're talking about Christianity. Now you're talking about, whoa, man, you could feel the anxiety that people have when, and I understand it. I get it, because, I've been there. I've been there. I would, feel the same way just even 2 or 3 years ago, maybe. But when you start to raise these things, you start to ask these questions, right? That one in particular, I was not surprised, but it was enlightening to me that one still is like, whoa, boy, you're touching a spot there that I don't know if I'm comfortable with you touching. I mean, I had that still with people talking about the Bible and things like that. But boy, when you talk about pulling the whole idea of Christianity out.
Yeah, in a Lego set, that would be, or what's the game with the wood little pieces? It Jenga?
Yes,
You know,
that would be one of the last pieces.
you pull that piece out.
Yeah. Yeah, for some people, but what does that, my point is, what does that show you about your faith then?
Yeah,
If you can pull
yeah.
any part of it out and it falls to the ground, then maybe it wasn't really truth in the first place.
It'd be a terrifying experience if you're alone in
Of
that. You don't have,
course, of
right?
course. I
Boy,
mean, it's and that's
terrifying.
I can tell you a story
Please.
that we had started a semi-progressive church here in town. This was like the last church that I started. And and here again, that word progressive means a lot of different things. And I decided to do a series of messages talking about, kind of hot topics, and mainly with the whole purpose was just to say, okay, congregation, we don't have to believe me. We don't have to agree on any of these things. But here's another way to look at these issues, even biblically, right? So I did one of them was on hell, another one was on the Bible. And then I've got to, the whole, queer, being gay, that thing, homosexuality, right?
Right.
And I just showed in the scriptures where you could see it differently than, that you could see the scriptures as actually be affirming. And, so I just went line by line, verse for verse through all the clobber passages. And, anyway, at the end of the thing, this was where this is going. We lost. I mean, we lost several people, several families from. And two things happened. One was we had a bass player who, great guy. He played bass in the worship team. And the Sunday before, because we planned out all the messages, so he knew this one was coming. He cornered me the Sunday before and says, "Hey, Chris, I just don't know if I'm going to be able to be here for next Sunday's message." And I said, "Hey, what's up?" He says, "Well, I don't know, the topic and everything." I said, "Well, I said, listen, that you don't have to agree with any of this. This is just sharing a different way of seeing things than maybe we've all seen them, right? We don't have to agree to agree. You can still be on the worship team if you don't like it, if you don't agree with it, right?" And he said, "I just don't know. I don't know, Chris." And finally, I just looked at him and I said, "Listen," I said, "what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of?" And he literally said to me, he said, "Chris, I'm afraid you'll convince me." And then after that Sunday in the lobby, right, as the service is over, there's this nice young family. I've known them for a little while. And the wife and husband came up to me and they said, "Chris, boy, honestly, I really like that message about homosexuality in the Bible and all that kind of stuff. The biblical way of looking at it that affirms it." But then, with tears starting to kind of well up in her eyes, she said, "But you know what? I don't know what my family's going to think. She's married, but my family's going to think if I go to a church that a person can believe that this is okay." And she said, "I believe it. I agree, Chris. I get what you're saying, but I don't know how my family's going to take it and people who know me are going to take it." And so she just looked at the landscape and looked at the cost it was going to have and realized, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay this cost. And what the point of that I'm saying is that with any of these issues that I raise, whether it be why Christianity or this, that, or the other thing, right? For so many people, deep down, they're like, "Yeah, you know what? Damn it, you're right. You are right. I know you're right, and it pisses me off. And I know you're not right that I'm right, but I know you're getting at something that's off. It's not that you're right. It's just that I know you're pointing out something that's not where it should be, or not aligned properly in my soul." Yet they count the cost. They look around. They count the cost of what would it look like for me to have to re-examine that and possibly draw a different conclusion that I have now, and really have to go in and do some rearranging of the deck chairs and figuring out what really is at the heart. And they look at it and they're just like, no, I would rather just not deal with it.
Yeah.
And I listen. That's where I was for how many years in evangelical? I was an evangelical pastor for some 20 years until finally the honesty. And that's where I talk about honesty. The honesty was going, "No, I know this is not right. I know there's something wrong here, and I cannot just live this constant self-deception and trying to, learning to fake it and being better at faking it. And I have to get honest no matter the price. And that was the key to the transitions that I made.
And you took a risk and you got out. I'm
And
thinking
how
of,
many pastors, listen, the cost is tremendous. I mean, I've walked away from salary, from benefits, from health insurance. I mean, I walked away from relationships,
yes,
from a pension.
yes,
I mean, and I walked away from so much. That's the cost. I mean, and if you look at my writings from 2 years ago to 5 years ago to anywhere in this process, you'll see that everything has changed for me over time. And every time something changes, it's a risk. I mean, people come and go out of my social media all the time. One moment they're in love with me. They're like, "Oh yeah, Chris, I love what you're writing, man. Go, go, go." And then I'll put something up. They're like, "What did you just say?" And then all bets are off. Then the number of followers goes down, and so there's so much risk being on a spiritual journey that most people just say, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not.
can't do it.
I'm not going to change. I mean, the worst place to try to become spiritual and have a true, genuine, honest journey of faith is church. The
It's so
gravity of
true.
church, the gravity of
It's so true.
Christianity is to land. And once you're landed, how dare you ever move? And it's even true in progressive world. I mean, progressive world, progressive church, a lot of times it's just conservative evangelicalism with shiny new wrapping paper. You got the same patriarchy there. You got the same, celebrity pastors and, people trying to build their own platforms. I mean, I can't tell you, when I first came on the scene as a writer, there was like 2 or 3 other writers in the progressive world that I had, I'm totally butt naked coming into this. I've never been in the progressive world, right? And there was guys, progressive writers who, openly tried to undermine my writing because they were trying to build their own platforms and sustain their own thing, and I was a threat. And I'm like, what the hell?
There's 2 things I want to speak to before we say goodbye to each other. You mind me asking the woman that at the end of that service, heartfelt, "I'm with you, Chris, but I've given my context. I can't do this."
Yeah.
Did she stay or did she leave?
No, they left.
They left. Chris, it reminds me. I've been in the therapy trade for the industry, if you will. Don't really like to frame it that way. I've been at it for 35 years, and I've worked a lot in domestic violence. I've done a lot of domestic violence work, and just listening to her and just kind of feeling her heart is that, for some people, they can't leave.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking about how it's kind of takes us back to where we started today. I'm going to assume, a beautiful mind, that she still follows you. I'm not asking you for any details whatsoever, and I would not want her to be disclosed. But I know in DV situations, a lot of times the message is, well, just get out of the situation, confront him or her,
right,
and just get out of the situation. But there's such a delicacy in people's lives at stake. But I'm just thinking, man, there's a possibility that if she's still in that world, she's empowered by knowing you're not, that
right,
you're out there doing the work, right? And that the beautiful thing is, even if she's a prisoner in a family situation, hopefully on the inside she's free.
Yeah.
Even if she has to make slogans and say the language and say this and that. Because I get a sense with you, and maybe it's just obvious. People listening will go, "Doug, that's obvious." But I get a sense with you that you're not trying to create any kind of new organization. You're not trying to create a new movement or a new church or a new place for people to organize and now believe around this. Let's now organize our belief around this. It sounds like to me, it's like people can go whatever direction, but there's not a place that you're calling people to. You're really helping people get free, and then they can find their own way in the world.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, not that community is bad or anything.
No.
But I just feel like I think we've been looking for love in all the wrong places, beginning with church. And I think that from my experience, the more that you strip away from these things, you find the real thing that was there all the time. It just got buried.
Yeah.
So that, I think, and you know what? I mean, I only write what I'm experiencing. I just write. And someone asked me, well, why do you write? And I write, well, the first reason I write is kind of selfish. I write because I feel like I need to write. I've got this feeling or this thought that I feel like I need to share. And it's quite selfish, honestly, in some regards. But then I'm also knowing that whatever I'm experiencing, if I tell it well enough, there's going to be people out there to go, oh my God, that's exactly what I've been thinking and feeling. And in so doing that, there's redemption and there's courage and there's, hope.
Chris, it's interesting, the word selfish. I'm forgetting where I read this. The word selfish, in its original meaning, just meant full of self, like the word bookish. To say to somebody, hey, you're awful bookish, was a compliment. It's like, wow, you read.
Yeah.
So selfish has gotten a really bad rap. It's like, you write just because this is what you have to do. I mean, it's like Anne Lamott has to write. She just has to write. That's the way she communicates with the world and to herself. So let's end with today. Your first book was Leather-Bound Terrorism.
Correct.
Your second book was
Stupid Shit Heard in Church.
I bet that sold well. Great title.
It was hard to get someone who would edit it. It was hard to get someone who would design the cover for it. I mean, because I told the people who I interviewed to edit, I said, listen, you have to believe in this book. You have to, I mean, I can't have somebody edit it who doesn't be able to, at least to a certain degree, harmonize with it. Hard to find many people who are willing to do that. And then, the cover was done by a lady in Canada, which was very well done. But we had fun with it.
What's next, Chris? Tell us a little bit about your writing life as we say goodbye to another one this morning.
I really don't know.
Don't know.
I've been thinking about putting together another book.
You're very active on your website with your posts. I mean, I pulled one up 2 years ago, but you've got some really current stuff. You've got a lot of followers on Facebook. So you have a community that you're writing to.
I don't think I've posted anything on chriskratzer.com in like a long time. I've just kind of stopped doing that. The reason being is that it's hard to everything changes, in terms of how to connect people to your writing. It used to be that you could post something on Facebook that was linking to an article you wrote on the blog, and that would be the great way to do it. But then Facebook and other places discovered that they don't want you leaving Facebook and going somewhere else, so they kind of switch the algorithms to where that doesn't work. So in order to try to communicate to as many people as you can communicate with, I found that just sticking on Facebook right now is kind of better. I think, there may be another book involved, soon. That's a daunting task. It's a lot of pushing, a lot of birthing going on.
Chris, this has been really good to be with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me on.
I hope to get to know you more. I hope to, I've just got some thoughts about maybe some things in 2025 you and I could maybe do together, but that's for another time. I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it. Be well. Yeah, thank you. And,
you bet.
Be well, Chris.
Thank you, and you as well.
All right. Thank you, man.